our talk is based on two observations. The first is that a very strong interest of ours, which we want to talk to you about today, is technology adoption. And our talk is based on two observations. First, that technology is pervasive, it's systematic, and it's persistent. There's a lot of technological change that we are living through. And this is not new. This has been evolving, but it's been evolving at a very rapid pace over the last few years. So that's the first observation that we will demonstrate to you with some, with the research, both ours as well as other literature. The second observation that we have for you, that our talk is based on, is that technology adoption is, especially of radical technologies, is rare. Right? So technology is persistent, it's systematic, it's pervasive, but not all firms adopt technology. In fact, the most persistent trend is the inability of incumbents to respond when technologies and markets change. So, if this was the year 1857, your boss said that Alexander Graham Bell has invented a way to transmit voice over wire, what should we do? Western Union at the time dismissed Bell's innovation as a toy. And Western Union was not the first company to do that, and certainly not the last, right? And we'll put up examples of several companies where this has happened. And our motivation is to try and understand why that happens. Why is it that this is such a persistent trend that incumbents do not respond when their technologies and markets change? So what we have up on this slide is, to begin with, is to demonstrate research that has shown that that the nature and content of innovation across a range of firms, a range of industries, is increasingly technologically biased. If you look at the chart on the top left, what it's telling you is that the stock of software patents has increased significantly over time, right, across diverse firms. What this chart on the left lower half is telling you is that the stock of ICT patents, in not just software, but wireless, communication, hardware, software patents of firms, has increased significantly over time. So the average proportion of tech patents in the firm used to be about 10%. That's increased to about 45% today, right? So tech is, in some sense, becoming increasingly central to innovation. That's what the graphs on the left tell you. What the graph on the right tells you is that what we did was we took every patent and we drew a citation network, which is, if patent A cites patent B, we drew a link between those two patents. And then we did this at the industry level, right? So if this industry is citing this industry, we have a link between it weighted by the number of patents that industry is citing. And we drew this intersectoral citation network. And what the graph on that bar graph is telling you is that the tech industry, the software, hardware, communications, connectivity, or the companies that are producing these technologies are central to innovation processes. That is, their patents are being cited across diverse industries and diverse firms, which is, tech is increasingly central to innovation. If tech goes down, the tech industry goes down, tech firms go down, there's a lot of innovation overall that systemically gets affected, right? So that's the point of it. Essentially, that tech is becoming increasingly central to innovation. If the average auto industry manufacturer's stock of patents, let's say 10 years ago it was 10%, today it's 45%, you must ask, what is it telling you about the evolution of that auto manufacturer? Right? So what is it telling you? The next slide, please. It's telling you, so if 10% of my patents were tech patents, my car was largely a bundle of mechanical components. Today, if 40% of my patents are tech patents, then my car is essentially software, right? So my car is essentially, my products, my processes are all becoming incredibly tech-centric, right? This is important because products define business models, right? And therefore, if your product is changing, your business model is also changing. And you can think now about how the business models in the automobile sector have evolved over time, right? 10 years ago, you would not have said, would you have said that a taxi service is a competitor to a General Motors or a Toyota or a Mahindra? Would you have said that 10 years ago? Perhaps not, but would you say it today? Would you say that Uber is a legitimate competitor for the Toyotas of the world? You would say yes. You would say yes because they're taking away their customers, they're changing their buyer behaviors. Mobility is now separated from the car, and one company is in the business of mobility, right? Because tech is now, when tech comes in, your products start to get digitized. You're no longer just in the business of physical goods, you're also in the business of information goods. This is is an hour-long presentation by itself, but I'm trying to condense that idea and put it across. I'm hoping it's clear, right? So therefore, the business model itself starts to change. And when business models start to change, they create disruptive dynamics in industries, right? Can I go to the next slide, please? Can you give me the clicker? I'll just do it. No, it won't work. Okay. So this starts to create disruptive dynamics because a Toyota knows how to respond to a General Motors. It does not know how to respond to an Uber. So if you think about several industries, if you think about who's the leading book retailer, if you think about who's the leading marketer, who are the leading players in the music industry, who are the leading players in financial services, how is our Skype and WhatsApp or whatever, legitimate competitors, and you'll come to digital, right? So you'll come to a whole class of tech startups, tech giants, who are starting to change and create disruptive dynamics in traditional industries, right? And these business models then start to create disruptive dynamic. And therefore, it's imperative for the Toyotas of the world to recognize an Uber as competition, recognize Tesla as competition, and have a strategy in place to respond to it. But therein comes our second observation, which is that it's difficult to do, okay? What we are pointing to here is that tech is a general purpose technology, right? Information technology is a general purpose technology, which means it doesn't just drive innovation in the IT industry, it's complementary with innovation in other industries and drives and spawns complementary innovations in those industries, in a range of industries, right? It's like how when electricity came along, electricity transformed productivity across multiple industries. It's a general purpose technology. General purpose technologies are obviously incredibly valuable, but tech is different from electricity today because electricity is not a source of competitive advantage, but the next slide will tell you that tech is a source of competitive advantage. You don't have electricity, you're competitively disadvantaged, but if you have electricity, you're not advantaged in any particular way. You have tech, it's a source of competitive advantage. What this graph is telling you is that these researchers, this is a paper by McAfee and Brynjolfsson, two MIT researchers, who essentially looked at this shock in the late 90s. Remember, the late 90s was a period of significant innovation. In corporate IT, you had the internet, you had a bunch of online business models, enterprise systems, a lot of things happened. Some of these firms started to invest heavily in tech, which is the red line. Industries like retail, financial services, etc., started to invest heavily in tech. Those industries, post-90s, their competitive dynamics started to look fundamentally different. The performance spread, the volatility, the churn, a bunch of things in those industries would now start to look very different from both the gray line, which is the low IT intensive industries, as well as their historical performance, right? And therefore, what this tells you, if this was like electricity, you would probably see a bit of a gap and then a return to an equilibrium state. You don't see that. Sorry, the state as before, you don't see that. So what you see is that tech creates these advantages, right, that are difficult to replicate. So tech is a source of competitive advantage. It merits a response. Toyota needs to have a response to an Uber, right? So it kind of, so that's the story thus far, right? Tech is pervasive, it's systematic. Tech is a source, tech alters products and business models. Tech is a source of competitive advantage because responding to those changes is not easy, and it changes competitive dynamics in industry. And therefore, it's important to have a response. We must ask then, why don't firms respond, right? The next slide, please. This is another research fact, which is that incumbents on average struggle to respond to radical technology changes, right? So in the 90s, you had the mini computer industry, an Amazon versus a Barnes & Noble. There are a bunch of stories, right, where I talked to you about several industries where the competitive landscape has changed fundamentally. Okay, so what that illustrates to you is that incumbents on average struggle in responding to radical tech change, and there is response in such change. The question we are interested in asking is why, okay? And Anand will present the second reason. I'll just talk to you briefly about the first. The first reason is, can you take the next slide, please? Captivity by customers. What do I mean by this? The next slide. I'll briefly try and explain this to you. This is a reasonably well-known framework, but there's several streams of research that back this and are aligned with this. But here's a quick capsule of this idea, right? So the idea is that all firms are traversing a performance trajectory. Yours, mine, everyone's, right? We're all traversing a performance trajectory. At some point, we begin to, let me take the example of mini computers, which I talked about so long. Digital was selling mini computers, $250K a piece, mini computer, earning 45% margins. That's a mini computer manufacturer. It's traversing a performance trajectory. On that trajectory, you're creating more and more value for your customers and earning better margins. At some point, you begin to overserve the market, which means the ability of the customer to absorb your product at your performance cost ratio becomes difficult. Okay? What percent of Excel's features do you think we use? 3 to 4%, right? So you're creating a product, you're adding features, you're creating utility, and you imagine you keep increasing price. You're exceeding the ability of the mainstream market to absorb that product. And at that point, that market is ripe for disruption. Along comes a disruptor ready to do that job. I've put the disruptor here. Can you think of why that is the case? There's only one axis, it's performance. The disruptor in its origins is an inferior product. So all the companies that I talked about, right? Uber, it's a taxi service. I'm a large auto manufacturer. Here comes a taxi service, right? It's an inferior product. What's the implication of that? I don't take it seriously. So disruption is sneaky, correct? And it's an information product. It's a low marginal cost product. Here a music industry, here is your giant telecom manufacturers, here your auto manufacturers, here are everybody, right? And then along comes this product here. It doesn't meet you here. If it meets you here, you will take notice. The first personal computer, Apple, was sold as a toy in schools, retailed for $1,500, earning 10% margins. Here you are, mini computer manufacturer, $250K a piece, 45% margins. What are you thinking? Should I invest in a product that none of my existing customers will buy and which will erode my margins? Or should I invest in a product that nobody will buy and which will erode my margins? So disruption is actually a problem of it's not a problem of bad leadership, it's a problem of good leadership, right? And therefore you miss this. And the characteristic of the disruptor, it doesn't stay where it starts. It starts to add layers to the business model and ultimately moves in your direction. If it's a nano, it stays here. It's not a threat to the auto manufacturer. It's not nano. Uber is commoditizing the car. And then it starts to add layers. And then how it evolves is what makes it disruptive. Okay? So this is captivity by customers. Again, these are all fairly involved points. I apologize for the brevity in the discussion, but we are constrained by time. If I go to the next slide. So what can you do in response? You can acquire if the disruptor is willing to be acquired. Keep in mind that what is happening here is that an existing way of functioning an organization is constraining you, right? You have an existing customer, your resource allocation processes are biased towards that customer. Your ability to break free of that resource allocation process will help you drive innovation, correct? And that's like the recurring theme for our entire talk. You can acquire, you can create an entity within an entity. You're trying to, again, beat the competency trap, beat resource allocation processes, biased ones, and therefore you can do that. You can integrate, isolate, and incubate that organization, right? Incubate it, isolate it from your organization so it doesn't think like you, right? Do that. And then you integrate it later with the parent organization, right? Your ability to continuously experiment and do this on a continual basis becomes an important response to beating customer captivity. Okay, I'll have Anand talk about the second form of. If you could take the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Deepa. I hope I'm audible. Very good morning to you all. So let me quickly dive into the second reason. We are going to be talking about captivity by investors. So the question is, why don't firms invest in these radical innovations, and the second reason is attributed to maybe the investor preferences, right? So if you can keep clicking, yeah, go on, please. So the fundamental thesis is that shareholders play a key role in shaping firm strategies. And why would that be? Well, you can think about the shareholders of incumbents as one of the owners of the firm. And these owners of the firm tend, just like all of us do, tend to evaluate the performance of companies by thinking about how legitimate are these strategies, right? So by legitimacy, I mean that whether they conform to shareholders' expectations or not, right? So for that, I would like for you to focus here is that, what ends up happening is the shareholders use something called as schemas. What are schemas? It's just a way for me as a shareholder to examine how a company is actually performing, right? Relative to its peers, relative to other firms in the same category. So this is what schemas mean, right? There's some sort of a rubric, right, to evaluate the performance of firms, and those set of rubrics, which I'm calling as schemas, can broadly be of two types. They tend to sometimes reward firms simply because of their current profits, or on the contrary, sometimes it's because they are focusing on future growth, right? So they tend to use schemas. And of course, the analysts who are sort of sitting or mediating between the company and the shareholders are sort of mediating it by enabling shareholders to make sense of the information that the company puts out. And these typically guide the strategies of companies, right? Simply because this is like, you're being evaluated as an incumbent, and shareholders use schemas, and that in turn shapes decisions, especially these long-term decisions in our context, including R&D resource allocations, right? And the fundamental thesis is that firms that conform to these schemas, so I'm expecting as a shareholder for the incumbent to show a lot of growth in current profits versus future growth. So to the extent that companies are conforming to those respective schemas, the stock prices are higher because these are eventually encapsulated in the stock prices. The stock prices are higher. And of course, the companies care about stock prices. And as a result, these kinds of preferences end up influencing the behavior of companies as well, right? In our case, for this discussion, long-term investments, long-term R&D investments, which are required to adopt a radically new technology such as the ICT. If we can move ahead, please. So firms face constraints. What kind of constraints do they face? Incumbents face constraints. If a firm is evaluated for their current profits, they might face constraints in investing in the future, right? Now that I've laid out this idea of legitimacy, it should be somewhat clear that the income-based schema would enforce constraints on firms. On the contrary, the companies that are valued for their future growth may not face those constraints. In fact, they might receive an encouragement from its shareholders to invest in the future and adopt radical technologies. If you could move, yeah. So here's a classic example, right? So this is circa about 2017, but I think the principle holds even today, right? 6 years later. But what you see over here is that the stock prices of Tesla was much higher than that of GM and Ford, two companies which had strong fundamentals in 2017, but yet the performance of Tesla, the stock prices of Tesla was higher than GM or Ford. And the reason was because for Tesla, what the shareholders really cared about was the future. So you could think about Tesla as growth-based, right? Being evaluated based on the growth-based schemas, whereas the other two were based on income-based schemas. And the argument over here is that if you are a GM or a Ford, you do face constraints from the shareholders to invest, to make these long-term bets to adopt these radically new technologies. If you can go on. You can go on to the next one, please. Okay. So if you buy that thesis, this observation also depends on a few other factors. For example, one factor that might determine it is the extent to which your shareholder, right, the proportion of shareholder care about dividends versus capital appreciation, which I'm calling as buyback, right? So if you have a greater proportion of shareholders who really care about capital appreciation, right, buybacks as I'm calling it, then you might, as a company, this incentive or the effect of these growth-based schemas itself could be quite exaggerated, right? On the contrary, if you have a bunch of shareholders, if most of your shareholders really care about dividends, and you, as a company, as an incumbent, want to invest in long-term innovation, the penalty might be dramatic as well, right? Similarly, long-term incentives to the board, right? So if there is greater alignment between the board and the shareholders, which is what long-term incentive plans are for. They are to incentivize the managers to act in conformity with board's, the shareholder strategies. If that's what the long-term incentive plans are doing, what it does do is that it strengthens both these relationships, right? So on the one hand, if there are long-term incentive plans for the board, the effect of growth-based schemas are magnified. And if there are long-term incentives, the effect of income-based schemas are also just as magnified. So this is based on our work, Deepa's and my work, based on a lot of data. I mean, for people who are in data sciences, this may not be a lot, but to the extent that as academics, this is the kind of data that we use over 30 years, right? So this is just not over a limited period of time. It covers a lot of firms, so you have to now start to take this on faith. Yeah, so if we can move to the next slide. So what we did is we also wrote up HBR, Harvard Business Review article on the same thing that essentially talks to how shareholders or investors of incumbents can themselves act as a constraint to firms adopting radically new technologies, right? Next one, please. And then the question, of course, is that if you believe in all of these, this fundamental thesis, how do firms manage this problem, right? So for one, some of these articles that I'll talk about tells you that this is something that firms are actively worried about, incumbents are actively worried about, so much so that they start to make these extreme moves. Here's an example of TIBCO that said that, look, I'm facing so much constraints from my shareholders and I can't invest in innovation to adopt these radically new technologies. I'm going to take back my company and make it private, right? So did Dell do it, for example. And of course, Elon Musk, who manages to stay in the news, also said that he wanted to do the same thing precisely because of the reasons that we spoke about, which is the constraints that a company like like Tesla, might face from investors in terms of investing in innovation, right? So the question that we would like to ask with the panelists and some of you is, arguably these are very extreme moves. Can firms do something else as well that is not as extreme to manage investors and yet stay innovative, right? Something that we would probably like to know a lot more. I will leave you with a quote in the next slide to summarize, right? It's not, yes, of course, there is a difficulty in adopting new ideas or new technologies, but just as important or difficult is escaping from old ones, right? So a very wise man, John Maynard Keynes, said that. This is exactly what both of our conversations point to. And if you think about it, this is the genesis of how competitive dynamics in industry itself change with the advent of new technologies. There are new entrants, there are incumbents that fail to react, and they end up failing, which in turn changes or alters the competitive dynamics in an industry, right? This is what we've been seeing, right? So if you look at Ben Bernanke and everybody else talking in front of the Fed, they call this as creative destruction. So the seeds of creative destruction is also because firms, incumbents, especially incumbents, struggle to adopt radically new technologies. And we just spoke about two of those constraints in this talk. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a new definition of innovation for you. It's not, it's not the development of new products and ideas. It's the ability to escape from old ones. And we thought we'd explore that theme in the next 45 odd minutes with our very distinguished panel. I have with me Ganesh here. Should we get the Zoom?
Yeah, Rohini on.
Rohini on Zoom, please.
So, yes, I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Rohini. You can hear us?
Yes, and very loud and clear.
Very nice. So welcome to Ganesh, Rohini as well. Rohini, thank you. Rohini's not start unwell, but she's been very gracious, and we really appreciate her joining us online for this conversation. And like Anand concluded, if the theme of our talk has been, at least this has been our observations and research, we're very fascinated by this, that, there is so much. I mean, we're living right now, everyone's talking about large language models, about AI, about how it's changing different functions, exposure to multiple occupations, where are we going to be, all of that, right? And therefore, it's interesting as to what constrains technology adoption. We've presented to you what the research says in terms of, how your existing way of doing business holds you captive through external stakeholders like customers and investors. With the panel, we wanted to explore. Ganesh is a serial entrepreneur. I'm going to let him, of course, say a little bit about himself, as well as Rohini. They're both, leading technology functions, technology business models. Ganesh is a serial entrepreneur. He's done incredible work, started Big Basket. There's so many others that I'd like you to talk about. But he's so we wanted to get Ganesh's perspective on how startups lead innovation. How do they think about business models? And also we'll kickstart by asking him, what are some of the new radical technologies that are there in his portfolio right now? So we'll talk about all of that. And with Rohini, we also wanted to understand Microsoft, which has done incredibly well at responding to some of these innovations in the last few years, right? So talk about what's that company DNA look like. May I request both of you to just tell us a little bit about yourselves and, how, and, we'll talk a little bit about, and relate that to the theme at hand as well. Rohini, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, first of all. It's good to be here. I wish I was there in person. Very, very interesting topic. It was good to hear, Deepa, both your and Anand's initial remarks. My own journey has been in R&D, began my career at AT&T Bell Labs in the mid-90s, then went into the more business side, so have kind of traversed both sides of the world, if you will, strategy, business, and very hardcore R&D and tech world. And clearly that comes together in the role I play today as the CTO for Microsoft India, South Asia. And as you rightly said, the pace of innovation, pace of technology is only accelerating. We've seen that in the last 12, 14 months. But I think and I'll stop with that and would love to make some initial comments after Ganesh has introduced himself in response to the comments that you started out.
Sure. Ganesh?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. My introduction is simple. What you see is what you get. Bald old man, unemployed and unemployable. Okay, right. That's my background. Before reaching here, once upon a time, I was as handsome. I had as much hair as Professor Anand, but this is a result of starting.
There's not much left. Yeah, I should say. Yeah.
Okay, there's not. This is a result of starting multiple businesses. I had 4 greenfield businesses which we started, raised money, and sold. And then for the last 10 years, I've been promoting businesses like Big Basket, Home Lane, Bluestone, Portia Medical, Verloop.io, 10 of these businesses under a venture builder platform called growthstory.in. I also spent time teaching at Leading Management Institute, ISB and IM Bangalore being 2 of them. So happy to be here back at the place where I teach.
Thank you, Ganesh. And thank you, Rohini. Ganesh, we'll start with you. You talked about a portfolio of stellar companies. Can you tell us a little bit of, pick any of these and tell us about some exemplar product, organization, business model that you believe is radical innovation, is changing the landscape of, an incumbent industry or function?
Okay, I mean, this is the answer to this can be a full course at ISB.
Correct.
Okay, right. So, but I'll try to, in the interest of time, I'll try to shorten it. So, I'm going to take example of Verloop.io. So that's an AI ML company that is about 7 years old. We started as a company that will help customer service automation. Okay, right? Make customer service more efficient. The first customer was Nykaa. All of you know this for customer service for Nykaa because and both customer service and for sales support. So when it started, it is traditionally using the old machine learning techniques and models. So what was that? So it had a product that basically helped people could interact with it in chatbot. If people had a question, they can ask a question. It was primarily driven by keywords. whatever customer is asking or a potential salesperson is asking, look at the keyword and based on that, give a response. Because I mean, how many things will a customer ask? So have a list, have the keyword and keyword response. So that was the first level thing. It was great. It saved about 30%, about 20 to 30% of the queries. Balance 70% was transferred to a customer service agent. So that was the version 1 of the product. Then technology changes came. All of you know about Google's white paper about transformer that transformed the AI/ML space. Okay, right? So that was a transformer thing came. That helped in changing the product to a next level. And what was the level? Now suddenly you don't have to have keywords from the customer. You could understand customers' queries in slightly more natural language with higher level of accuracy. See, customers don't think of queries as keyword. They have a problem. I'm not able to get this. I did not get that. They don't press keywords. The only other solution that was to have IVR. All of you must be familiar with IVR. Press 1, press 2, press 3 and all that stuff. No, that's not the way customer reacts. So transformer came, and transformers, what did it? It took it to a next level. The next level was that you could get free format queries, but still had a problem. The responses were still templatized. You had to have standard response, you have to respond. And what did we do? In order to make it slightly less templatized, for everything we would have 3 responses, 3 templates of responses, and used to serve those templates on a random basis, so that you don't see the same monotonous response. Next time when you come, you will see this 2 or 3rd of the 3 responses that's there, but still very, very clunky. Then you had this generative AI come up that completely transformed, to use the same transformer thing, completely transformed. Now suddenly you could have free flow, free format queries, free format responses. The ability to understand came up as a result of your ability to compute large language models that really changed the way we interact. It took it to a complete different level. So the latest Verloop.io product, and we did the same thing with Nika at multiple levels. Okay, right? 1, 2, 3. We have done this with banks at multiple levels. First level, 30% automation, 70% human agents. Second level, 40% automation, 60% human agent. But in both cases, the human agent, when it was handed over, the machine stopped. There was nothing else to do. The human agent has to handle the way human agent are handling. In the third situation, very different. 70%, 30% handed over, but a very transformative, again to use the same word, thing happened. In that 30% also, the machine language or the system did not go off. They could assist. Human assist could happen. So you could have these agents, not only 30% is handling by human agents, 50% of the task is done by human assist. They can actually help them do better. So that is transformative. The last point in this, because of this LLM, what we are able to do for queries and all that, we are able to do 100% quality control. Can you imagine this? All of you know, who know customer service know, in retail typically quality control is done in 0.2% of the cases. Because for quality control, somebody has to sit, listen to the call, make notes, is very expensive. In case of regulated industries and banks, typical quality control is 2%. Now we change it to, we do it for customers. Verloop.io does it for customers. 100% quality control. 2 things. It creates large amount of data sets to learn and train. And 2, it really helps in what I called as human assist. It can actually now go and teach the agent how to, acting as a co-pilot, how to help them respond better. Some of the use cases that we have done for the Verloop.io has done for a US telecom company is it can actually reduce the cost of customer service. If all of you use Tata Sky or Dish, you know how the concept works. You call them, they will tell you, you go to the screen, open the window, press this number and all that. And most of the cases, it's not getting solved. They'll say, we will send you an agent. Now in US, to send a telecom service agent cost hell of a lot of money. And what did customer service agent do? Because they were gold on customer service CSAT scores, customer satisfaction scores, they used to immediately offer, because it doesn't go from their pocket, agent will visit you. And telecom companies were bleeding badly on this. Now, because of this LLM assisted AI, we can actually listen to every call. The AI agent listens to every call. And if the customer service human agent is not following the protocol, is offering the personal visit too early, it will actually prompt him saying that, hey, ask this question. Ask question number 2, question number 3, question number 4. Go through that process before offering the agent. Okay, right? It will do that. And one more level. If he doesn't listen to twice, it actually the agent will loop in their manager saying that, listen, this is a potential service agent visit case. It will increase your cost. So please intervene. He could actually intervene. Same thing is happening in case of errors and mistake. If somebody is making an error, take the case of healthcare assistant or a doctor or this. You're prescribing without asking 2 key questions about how is so and so HbA1c level. Did you check that? Did you check the blood pressure? You're not asking. They will prompt. So 100% QC can be used in multiple ways to be able to do this. This is exactly how we are using technology to be able to do that. From a business model perspective, this helps in the business model change. Because earlier, Verloop.io used to charge on what is the saving, what is the project and all that stuff. What is the cost per agent? Oh, you are saving so much of cost. Now, it is like a BPO, new age BPO going and saying that your current cost of customer support was $4 million. We will cut it down to $2 million, but give us 50% of the saving that you do. If you don't save, all our services are free. So the business model is getting transformed. So it's phenomenal the way how this transformation is happening.
Thank you, Ganesh. That's very fascinating. I'm hoping you are also thinking, from the incumbent's perspective. So there is a radical change that's also happening in the sales function, in the marketing function of firms. So earlier if you have these people who have strong sales capabilities, now also interacting with machines and, working in a manner that's working with machines, encoding domain expertise in the machines, learning from, being assisted by them, learning to be assisted by them, all those also become then important capabilities for the incumbent firm, right? So which
is what I wanted to ask Ganesh, but, hopefully short answer, right?
You want to ask Rohini that question?
No.
We have Rohini is an
on both sides, right?
Story
on both
that
sides.
we write with Rohini.
But what we thought we could also ask is that when you talked about the transformation from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, the incumbents are also reacting, right?
Correct.
So do you sort of recall any challenges that you faced from the incumbents as you try to migrate them from, let's say, stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, which is the transformational stage that you spoke about?
Yeah, no, that's a very valid question. Okay, right? We have seen both kinds of responses. There are companies that are very slow to respond. The reason is simple. You've got 1,000 agents. Now, how do you fire 500 people? Is one. And two, there is still a distrust of what they call as hallucination by the large language models. What happens if somebody gets stuck? So they have been slow to react. Okay, right? At one extent. On the other side, what we are seeing is the incumbents, because they have distribution, they already have profit pools, they already have deep insights. They realize, unlike earlier technology disruption, this LLM or large language model disruptions is something that plays to the advantage of incumbents. They can actually take it, incorporate it in the workflow, and be able to give the new startup or new age companies a run for their money, because they have distribution, they have the profit pools, they have the customers. They can actually commoditize this particular thing as offering for this. Just as an analogy, think of it like the way when IoTs came. Okay, there are startups and people offering IoT services, but the Schneiders of the world and all that stuff did a beautiful thing. They took the IoT, they integrated it with their product and solution. So voila, what happened? Suddenly, this whole IoT became a feature of their whole offering. It improved them and did that. So we see both early stages. So I'm not able to give a one categorical answer.
Thank you.
And a lot of variants, like an IoT, like a Siemens does something which is stock market enhancing versus a GE does something which sees a huge decline, right? So there's a lot of variance in how you combine. So the ability to combine these new technologies with your existing business model, source of competitive value. Rohini, shifting to you, if you could tell, Microsoft, of course, stands out as an incumbent that's had at least a very recent history of being incredibly innovative, agile, and responsive to changes, right? You're obviously in the news also recently. with the whole open AI movement. So
I also want to know whether Sam Altman is still
I'm
inside or outside.
We're not asking about Sam Altman. But if you can comment a little bit about, what is the, so how is the DNA of the firm changed in order to facilitate this, right, in the recent past? So what are some of the things that, because, like Ganesh just said, there is some incumbents that respond and there are some that are really slow. You're clearly not in the latter category. So what are some of the things that you want to talk about in terms of, we talked about building an organization with an organization. How are you spotting disruption? How are you responding to it? Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about just three ideas. One, I think you alluded to in the beginning, in the opening comments, about technology and innovation. First, I think you mentioned that both are not the same. They are two different things. One can have technology for innovation. One can do innovation as an application of technology. Technology can be a tool for innovation, but there is more than that to innovation. And the thing I'd like to call out is Microsoft over the last 10 plus years has been through a huge cultural transformation. There are enough number of companies and customers that come to us and tell us and ask us, tell us about your cultural transformation. What has been your cultural journey? And I think that doesn't happen overnight. And that is a huge differentiator. In a way, a company thinks about a know-it-all culture versus a learn-it-all culture, and that is not overnight. And when one goes through that transformation over years and years, it is a huge differentiator. I think that aspect of culture, whether you want to call it risk, level of risk awareness, inclusion, diversity, thinking about technology in multiple horizons. These are all elements of culture that play out in the way a company responds to innovation, whether inside or outside. So that's point number one as an important enabler. The second one is that you mentioned that, Deepa, in your opening comments, that while today we may be thinking about technology as interchangeably with information technology, actually technology would be much broader than IT. A recent report from Stanford in terms of emerging technologies that come out, there are enough number of technologies within there, whether it is neuroscience or biotechnology, synthetic biology, material sciences, that are not traditionally thought about as information technology. But the other point that you made about the interconnectedness between these, and the fact that information technology is a general purpose technology that is enabling innovation across all of these different emerging technologies, is a significant one. And that I could almost paraphrase to say that artificial intelligence is now accelerating the innovation across all of these technologies, namely, you call it material science, you call it neuroscience, space, sustainable energy technologies, which you would not think today as traditional IT information technologies, but are emerging technologies that are being enabled by IT or in many cases AI. The last comment I would make is, which brings us to the more recent times, is about something that our CEO has used the term, and I was reflecting about it before this session started, the idea of tech intensity. The idea of tech intensity is a combination of, it's almost an equation, whether you like to call it officially a mathematical equation or not, I'll leave it to you. But it's the multiplication of technology adoption and technology capability. In addition to the idea of trust, but I leave the point of trust aside, because trust in technology, without that, you cannot innovate. So let's leave that aspect of trust aside. But the idea of adoption and capability, the examples that you folks gave, right, that let's say an auto industry or even the IoT example that you gave, IoT is a technology for an organization to adopt it and add their own capability, their own domain understanding, their own understanding of whether they may be in the area of intelligent buildings, or they may be in the area of smart water management systems, etc. Their ability to adopt that technology and add the capability that they have about the industry, about the domain, their market, their customer, is what is the differentiator. Now, what happens is a lot of organizations have mental blocks about saying, okay, this technology is from outside. We didn't build it here. That's a mental block. And the other one is that we adopt a technology, but what is the differentiation between what our internal capability, internal secret sauce? I call it the capability as internal secret sauce. The way at which technology or other innovations are happening, these are not siloed anymore. They're happening in very broad ecosystem. I'll give a couple of examples. Microsoft research is part of the organization which works on, think about as Horizon 2, Horizon 3 technologies. Many of those, for example, language area innovations are happening today in India, in the Indian context, because India is so multicultural, so multilinguistic, in very close collaborations with IIT Madras, the AI for Bharat, and that is what you hear at the country level as the Bhashini project. That's been happening for many years. It is not siloed inside Microsoft and siloed inside an industry. It is a combination of the government, academia, and research organizations like Microsoft coming together. So it is a multidimensional effort. But now, once you've created language models, how do you make it real? The way they make it real, they really create impact, is when startups use those models and create capabilities, create customer experiences. It's when even large language models use language capability, LLM capability, build specific intelligence based on, let's say, a government schemes, let's say PM Kisan Yojana, and add on top of it the language capability. Now you have an innovation which has thought about adoption and capability in the context of India. And if you've heard of the app called Jugalbandi, it's about a farmer being able to interrogate or interact with PM Kisan Yojana in terms of what the person's eligibilities, etc., are in his or her own language. So it is not one thing. So I think that's the last part I'll leave it. I think the ability for an organization to innovate, which it's a combination of their ability to adopt at speed and add their own inner secret sauce to be able to innovate in their context, in the context of their organization, their business, their customers, their market.
Great point. Thank you, Rohini. So I'll also give it to you, Anand. I know you want to ask the last question. I just wanted to one observation that came out from there, which also relates to what we were saying, that the capabilities can be a continuous shift from where you are, or they can be a discontinuous shift, right? So, so for instance, if I take IoT, what you were talking about, which is you talked about this, no? So if I'm creating digital twins of all my equipment, and I'm using that and I can use that information to either just do predictive maintenance, real-time maintenance for that equipment, or I can create a new business model which is outcome-based. I can say my machine is not just going to get information from its own machine, but it can connect to other machines and a central server, whatever, and then I can now create an outcome-based business model for the client and take like a percent of that business, right? So the kind of capabilities become, but the second is more of a discontinuous shift and more risky, but also bears more returns.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if you look at, for example, just Philips comes to mind, from a global conglomerate to focusing on healthcare to just equipment to actually offering platform solutions that connect multiple, even competitors' machines into one. Go to a hospital and say, you buy from anybody, but they use my platform. Correct. That's a great example of what you just mentioned.
Correct. Thanks.
Yeah. So I wanted to build on a couple of ideas, right? So to me, when Rohini was speaking, what I thought, was for me a common link, right? We all have different prisms through which we look at things. Was this idea of leadership, right? You talked about transformation when you started off, but there are different aspects of leadership, right? Whether it's on Microsoft side or any adopter, right? An incumbent which is an adopter, the leadership. So I wanted to get a sense, since you are in a leadership position with Microsoft, I wanted to get a sense of how, what are certain things that leaders can actually do to sort of smoothen the adoption, especially when there is a discontinuous shift, right, in technology, right? So what are some of the things that, in your opinion, might actually has worked for a company like Microsoft, which has made a lot of these discontinuous changes themselves, is something that I just wanted to hear from you.
Yeah, I think, look, the nature of leadership in not just tech sector, but across businesses is really changing. I mean, I think leaders and I look at many leaders who I look up to, the idea of know-it-all is gone. The leaders generally have to be people who are what you may call servant leadership, right? I think the ability to say that I don't know what I don't know, and feel comfortable in your skin with that is terribly important. To me, that becomes one mantra that I think about on an everyday basis. The pace at which things have changed in the last 1.5, 2 years is people, even anybody who's been in the world of hardcore AI research for decades has been surprised. Right? You absolutely, any leader needs to look at this with huge amount of humility and growth mindset. But what that also tells us is that as leaders, we need to be the idea of your focus on purpose, your focus on vision becomes even more important. I'm asked oftentimes by people that, what will AI do to my jobs? Right? And that's a natural question to ask. And I think one of the important learnings that we all have to imbibe, and the point that Ganesh was also making on the customer service, and I'll come to that, is that what is the purpose of that customer service agent? Right? Is the distinction between your outcome and tasks becomes really important. Is the customer service agent's purpose is to create customer delight as outcomes? Versus, and if that is the clear focus of the customer service agent, then that person is going to look at AI as a friend, right? But if that focus goes away, and you say that my task is to attend these many calls, or this is that type of very different incentive mechanism, then AI is not a friend. AI is a threat, right? So I think the question also becomes, as leaders, that are we able to help our people straight true to their purpose, straight true to the value that they are creating, the outcomes that they're looking to drive becomes important. And the third I would say is, look, the technology world that I am exposed to every day, you have to embrace it. You just have to embrace it. And it is one of those points in history of technology, and some people can argue with me that where the distinction between people who adopt and people who don't is going to expand. It's going to increase because the pace of technology is exponential, and human mind is just not very good at understanding exponential trends. So the differentiation between companies that really move forward with adoption versus not is going to increase. So people's ability to really adopt and think what your outcome, what your purpose is going to be quite fundamental as leaders as we drive each of our respective organizations.
Thank you, Rohini. That was a fantastic closing. I think, so three things. And I also just wanted to add a layer to this and say that a lot of this is borne out by research. So, the fact that technology is pervasive. Rohini, if I may be allowed to paraphrase, it's pervasive. It's going to have far more systemic, pervasive, and far-reaching impact than what we've seen in the past. That's the world we're looking at. The second is, we don't know what we don't know, and traditional lessons of leadership, in some sense, need to be, unlearned. Right? You don't trust your intuition. In fact, what you know can hurt you. So, the ability to unlearn what you know becomes incredibly important as we face a new world. And finally, to align organizations around a common sense of purpose so that they can embrace technology and move forward in this new world.